So I guess the big news right now, the big news of the day is that Congress has passed the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. Now, this is the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was voted upon by Democrats in the Senate and a sliver of Republicans. This particular bill, for the most part, is a giant corporate giveaway. But there are a couple of neat things in there. But this wasn't the one. This wasn't the package that people wanted to have passed. What people were really eager for, what progressives, the left in general, were really eager about was the quote-unquote Build Back Better Act. That was the reconciliation bill, which was initially proposed as a $6 trillion expenditure, was whittled down to $3.5 trillion, and then even whittled down further in the past couple of weeks to, I think, $1.75 trillion, I think, is what it settled on. And I say settled in quotes because the whole point of contention with progressives is it was a decoupling of the social infrastructure items like universal pre-K, free two-year universities, free community college, basically, and a bunch of other initiatives that weren't specifically like roads and bridges type infrastructure, but were necessary components for revitalizing our labor market, and providing aid to working families. They decoupled all of that from the infrastructure bill and made it its own separate reconciliation package. And the idea I imagined from the corporatists that wanted to do that was, we're going to decouple these things we don't want to do from the things we do want to do so that we could pass the things we do want to do and then kill the things we don't want to do. And progressives were wise to that game, which is why they were always holding fast on not voting for the bipartisan infrastructure bill without voting on the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package. But at the end of the day, more progressives than not caved, and they ended up voting on the infrastructure bill without voting on the reconciliation package as well. Which basically means that reconciliation package is dead. All of those initiatives that we were fighting for and arguing about, going over the poll numbers about, highlighting the increased popularity of a lot of those individual items that were in that ticket, including the billionaire tax. A tax on 700 people in America who are all worth over $1 billion, and a tax that would apply to them. Afterwards, they would still be worth over $1 billion. So, the point of contention there is really quite shocking. It shouldn't be, but it is, because it's free. It's basically free money. Like, who are you pissing off with something like that? 700 people? Let those 700 people cast their votes. But the fear is that those 700 people are worth billions of dollars, and they'll spend those billions of dollars, attacking you for taxing them. But who's really gonna side with them in this day and age? With laymen, and this is, I was talking with Justin the other day. We went on an extended political rant. I cut that video down. I don't know if I'll upload it separately or not. It's a pretty long discussion we had, but if you could speak to if you could speak from the bully pulpit to the working people in this country, many of them across all political ideologies have come to form some kind of core agreements on a certain subset of things, one of which is that rich people just need to be taxed more. And if you have a general consensus among Democrats and Republican voters across the board on that, then there shouldn't be a fear in implementing that policy. But, there are arguments to be made on that either way. Nevertheless, the $1.2 trillion infrastructure package did pass. After an entire day and indeed months of deliberations and negotiations, Congress approved a long-debated infrastructure bill totaling $1.2 trillion. The 228 and one thing, before I continue, one thing that the news completely fell on their face in covering this is the historical context of infrastructure bills in America. This $1.2 trillion bill, I believe, is spread out over 10 years of spending. I believe that could be, I'm pretty certain this one's spread out over 10 years of spending. Which, is when you parse it out on yearly spending, it's not too dissimilar. It's a little bit more a year than Obama's infrastructure bill, the bill that Obama passed. Let me see. I have that up here somewhere. Oops. So, okay, Bush signed, George Bush W. He signed a quote-unquote whopping $286.4 billion transportation bill. So this was in 2005. At 2005, $286 billion, I guess, that passed as some kind of remarkable achievement for an infrastructure bill. I couldn't find any articles that explained how this parsed out yearly, but he passed this $286 billion infrastructure bill in 2005, the result of which was a 2009 report card of America's infrastructure that gave us a D. It gave us a D. Aviation, D. Bridges, C. Dams, D. Drinking water, D-. Ooh, that's a rough one there. Energy, D+. Hazardous waste, D. Inland waterways, D-. Levees, D-. And levees should be worse than that, given that this had happened. This report card was after Katrina. Public parks and recreation, C-. A rare bright spot. And it's sad when you can say that a C- is a bright spot. Rail, C-. Roads, D-. Schools, D. Solid waste, C+. C+. Transit, D. Wastewater, D-. America's infrastructure GPA is a D. And the estimated 5-year needed investment need is $2.2 trillion. That was 2009. They were saying that we needed $2.2 trillion. So keep that in mind. 286.4 billion gave us an infrastructure that grades out at D at an estimated need of 2.2 trillion. So what did Obama do when he passed his infrastructure bill? Did he invest? Did he implore the Democratic-controlled Congress to invest $2.2 trillion over 5 years for the infrastructure needs that America had at the time? The House and Senate said President Obama, the largest transportation package in a decade, costing $305 billion over 5 years. $305 billion over 5 years. The need was $2.2 trillion over 5 years. What we got was $305 billion over 5 years. $2.2 trillion need in 2009 over 5 years. $305 billion over 5 years. Well, what did that get us then? Did we improve on our grades? A little bit. America's infrastructure score, C-. From a D to a C-. There are water mains. There's a water main break every 2 minutes. An estimated 6 billion gallons of treated water lost each day in the U.S., enough to fill over 9,000 swimming pools. Growing wear and tear on our nation's road. I know we all experience this one, especially anybody in those areas where those bridges are falling out. Have left 43% of our public roadways in poor or mediocre condition, a number that has remained stagnant over the past several years. There are 30,000 miles of inventory levees across the U.S., an additional 10,000 miles of levees whose location and condition are unknown. And it did boost our grades a little bit. We went from a D to a C-. But given that what also is taking place in that time period is a rapidly devolving climate situation that's just making, stuff like how our levees function worse. It's making droughts worse. It's making, when you have a situation where droughts are causing water shortages and whatnot, and you've got a water main breaking every 2 minutes and spilling 6 billion gallons of treated water, you can't afford to lose that shit. Like, whatever gains we made in that meager investment back in the Obama years were probably all lost out. This infrastructure grade came out actually, I believe, in 2019, I want to say. Like, we're losing all of this out as our climate conditions worsen. So, I mean, it's not just like, it's not a static thing. Like, we got to play keep up. We got to play catch up, and then we got to play keep up. And right now we're making investments like we're already caught up and we're just keeping up. But we're not caught up. We got to catch up first. We're always coming behind. We're always trailing behind. We were trailing behind with Bush's pathetic investment. We're trailing behind with Obama's meager investment. And if we don't get the Build Back Better Act, even in and of itself, was still it wasn't the investment we really needed. Like, we needed that $6 trillion investment, to be perfectly honest with you. That's how much we have to spend in order to catch up. But, what was in the Build Back Better Act, that's kind of like better a little bit than nothing, right? So we need that. We do need that. And I think about it this way. Like, I had a car once before that was like literally the worst lemon in the world. I hated that thing. It was a 1991 Acura Integra, and it was in the worst condition ever. But at the time, I was working at like GameStop and Tinseltown movie theater. Wasn't making any money, and I was a full-time student, so I wasn't like pulling in hours. I was working when I wasn't at school. That car was a wreck. It was miserable. There were so many things wrong with it, but I remember I couldn't really afford to invest the kind of money I needed to really make it reliable. But I should have been able to invest the kind of money to do the basic maintenance and upkeep. And I remember needing an oil change, and I was like, oh man, $50 for an oil change. Like, that's a lot of money for someone that's making like $7 an hour, working 12 hours a week, 14, 15 hours a week maybe. And I would always drive by that Jiffy Lube and that whatever, and see the oil change costs and be like, I need to do it, but man, that's so much money. I need that money for I need the money for gas, for driving to work and to school. I need that money for food. I need that money. I was living with my parents, so I didn't have rent to pay, thank God. But I was still just barely, because I had to pay my car payment and I had to pay insurance. So I was always just putting it off. I'll do that oil change a little later. It's $50. I got to save that $50 for my more immediate needs. I'll do that oil change later. And then as I was driving home from work on the highway one day, my engine seized up, and it was totaled, and I had to borrow money from my parents. Luckily, I had that option to do that. Otherwise, I would have been real SOL. But I think I eventually paid them that money back. I had to pay them that money back, but that was like a $1,200 engine I had to replace. So I could have spent that $50 when I needed to, and maybe saved myself from, having to replace, a $12,000 or $1,200 engine. But, that's not the decision I made. I kept kicking that can down the road, and what would have cost me $50 ended up costing me $1,200, and that's how that thing happens. That's what happens when you neglect the money you're supposed to spend on maintenance and upkeep, and you keep kicking it down the road, and then you got to play catch up just to keep up. That's what's happening here. Like, our country's infrastructure is that shitty Integra, and every time we get a chance to spend money on maintenance on it, we kick it down the road and wait until like a complete and total disaster happens, like the levees breaking and wiping a American city off the map, or a wildfire just burns an entire city off the map, or God knows what other kind of disaster is going to happen, like a freeze maybe that freezes the entire state of Texas, and our shitty infrastructure here completely seizes up, and untold hundreds of people who have died freezing to death in Texas. Which freezing to death in Texas seems almost paradoxical, but that's the reality we live in now. And that not investing that money just makes that situation worse. So even though you'll see these numbers like $1.2 trillion, and you're gonna have a bunch of dipshits that are like, this is a historical amount of spending, and this is quite the blah 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 blah. It's like, no, dude, we're way behind. We're trying to catch up, and this isn't gonna really help us catch up by itself. Like, we got to do a lot more investments to catch up, so that we aren't constantly getting battered by a lousy infrastructure. And it's not just like the climate and stuff that affects that. It's also just basic wear and tear. Like, you got a bunch of trucks driving across the country on these roads that are wearing down, people driving back and forth across bridges that are collapsing on people. You've got an infrastructure in Texas, a power grid that can't maintain in the winter or the summer. They were even talking last summer, at the start of summer, about like We may have to start instituting rolling blackouts. You may have to start metering your usage. And it's like, holy shit! You mean to tell me that Texas's power grid can't even maintain under heat, which is what it was built for? But luckily, it didn't go down or anything. But whatever they did to prevent that from happening, the point remains that they had to scramble to do it. So, it's like just that's the keep up portion of it. Like being able to maintain an infrastructure that's reliable and steady through your day-to-day usage. That's keep up. But we got to catch up before we get to keep up. So that's the dismal state that we're at right now. The 228 to 206 vote held by the U.S. House of Representatives early Saturday morning will put a core piece of President Biden's domestic legislature to action. While 6 Democrats didn't vote for the bill, 12 Republicans joined. Those 6 Democrats that didn't vote for the bill, Jamal Bowman, Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Cori Bush, the six progressives, the squad, so to speak. The Justice Democrats. And kudos to them. The reason they didn't vote for it was because it was decoupled from the Build Back Better Act. And they knew that decoupling it from the Build Back Better Act was going to kill that bill. It was going to kill the recon bill. And all of those awesome initiatives in it that we need was going to die with it. So they voted against it in an effort to save that initiative, which is why 12 Republicans joined. Like, this is the part you should be suspicious of. Like, all of a sudden, 12 Republicans decide to wake up and, like, vote for what has exclusively been discussed in the media as a Democratic initiative, even exclusively discussed in the media as, like, a socialist initiative. All of a sudden, there are 12 Republican socialists. That should be the one that makes you a little suspicious about what's going on here, These guys woke up and voted for this bill so they could kill the bill that these 6 Democrats are trying to save. That's what that's all about. And corporate Democrats were more than happy to let them do that. While this is a huge win for the Biden administration, the president and House Speaker Pelosi were unable to land a vote of the passage of the Build Back Better Act, which includes a restructured federal tax credit for EVs up to $1,250 or $12,500. That's awesome. That's a great tax credit. That basically makes your average EV vehicle affordable to normal people. EVs are still like they're coming down in cost. They're a little bit cheaper now than they had been at any point in the past, but like you're still talking about like 30 grand, like about 30 grand for your cheapest EV right now. And being able to knock 12,500 off of that, makes an EV, puts an EV into competitive range with like, a brand new Toyota or a brand new Honda or something. It suddenly becomes like a $19,000 car instead of a $30,000 car. Or an $18,000 car. Which, for that amount, I definitely would buy one because the car that I have now wasn't too much less than that. I think my loan for my Sonata, my 2017 Sonata was only 17 grand. So I definitely, if I had the option to get a $12,500 credit on an EV vehicle, I don't know why I say EV vehicle. That's like ATM machine. I definitely would have done it. So that's not an insignificant thing at all, and it's needed, especially like if we're gonna try to cut back on our emissions, then we need to finally just kick this combustion engine thing, which is a bummer because I love combustion engines for the sportsmanship of it, but we need to move on. From day one of President Biden's tenure in the White House, he shared clear intentions to utilize Democratic majorities of Congress to get some major infrastructure legislation passed. Did he really? He didn't really fight for it. He just kind of put it out there and let like Bernie Sanders fight for it. This cash injection into U.S. infrastructure focuses on improving everything from roads to waterways and the promotion of electric vehicle adoption nationwide. One of the early terms of Biden's proposal was a proposed bill was restructuring the country's current federal tax credit program for zero emission vehicles. It's coming in loud in my headset here. Turn that down just a tad. Doesn't seem like that's coming in loud over the stream, so I'll just keep it the same over there. The current program offers U.S. consumers up to $7,500 in federal tax credits for EV, but limits the incentives for automakers at 200,000 units sold. For that reason, major American manufacturers like Tesla and GM have long surpassed that threshold, and their customers have been unable to take advantage of the credit. Now, that is arbitrary and dumb. That is some arbitrary dumb fuckery right there. That is some arbitrary dumb fuckery. Since the infrastructure plan was introduced earlier this year, it has faced opposition from conservatives and moderates in Congress. Yeah, of course. Earlier this week, we reported that Congress' most recent reform on the bill included the $12,000 EV tax credit, which had been folded into the Build Back Better Act to stay alive. With the latest news out of Capitol early Saturday morning, a major infrastructural bill has passed, but the Build Back Better Act remains in limbo, at least for now. It's going to remain in limbo. It's going to remain in limbo and then die. Early this morning, Axios shared the news that House vote to pass. While many of the exact spending details are still to come to light, the approved $1.2 trillion will include $550 billion in new spending. It includes the following: $110 billion for roads, bridges, and other infrastructure rehab nationwide. The U.S. infrastructure system earned a C- from the American Society of Civil Engineers earlier this year. That was what I showed you earlier. That was from the American Society of Civil Engineers. $7.5 billion for electric vehicles and EV charging stations. $2.5 billion for zero-emission buses. $2.5 billion in low-emission buses. What truly stands out in this approved bill is the $7.5 billion promise to establish a nationwide network of EV charging stations. Furthermore, an additional $65 billion will be invested towards overall clean energy and renewables for the U.S. electricity grid, hardening a long and antiquated system. Several House progressives voted against the infrastructure bill, calling for the Build Back Better Act to be approved simultaneously, and those were the reps that I had mentioned earlier. However, 13 Republicans crossed party lines to get the infrastructure part of the package over the finish line. While the Build Back Better Act remains in limbo, or while Build Back Better remains in limbo, it should still see passage soon, at least in some iteration. I don't have any faith in that. The $2,500 EV tax credit still alive, but not yet approved. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi began Friday's congressional session with plans to vote on a $1.75 trillion Build Back Better Act, and concurrently, they fucking... Honestly, it's not going to pass. They're not going to pass it. The Senate's not going to pass it at this point. They don't need to. Their bill passed already, so they don't need to pass this bill. You may as well put all that shit back in it and make it $3.5 trillion. And then make them vote against it. Put paid family leave back in it. Put universal pre-K back in it. Put tuition-free college for 2-year schools back in it. Put all of that shit back in it, and make them vote against it. That's what you should do. Make them vote against it. However, a small group of moderates, they're not moderates, they're corporate extremists, and the House refused to support legislation without a cost estimate from the CBO. As a result, House approved procedural vote to require to open Build Back Better Act to passage following an official CBO cost estimate. There are already a number of cost estimates done on it, so that's just trying to, that's like trying to find a judge that agrees with your ideology in some random district somewhere to hold your trial in. Those moderates opposed those moderates opposed all signed an assurance that they would vote in favor of passage once the score is released. Then why wait for the score to be released? If you're going to sign an assurance that you're going to vote in favor of passage, then it doesn't matter if the score is the score doesn't matter then. So then why wait for it? If you're gonna, if you're not saying that your voting in favor of passage is contingent upon the score, then there's no reason for the score. You may as well just vote for it then. But obviously, obviously they're lying. They're obviously lying. This vote for the larger overall spending package should take place when Congress resumes after a week-long recess. The same people that say you aren't worth paid family leave just constantly goes on vacation. Constantly. They have more recesses than anyone else. It wasn't just moderates that opposed the current terms of the Build Back Better Act either. While domestic automakers like Ford applauded Congress for its work, some foreign automakers with non-union U.S. manufacturers are already publicly denouncing the new EV tax credit unfair. Toyota, for example, has already launched an ad opposing the pro-union tax credit. Volkswagen is another company decrying the terms, calling the additional incentive fundamentally wrong. Oh, Volkswagen, you're the last people who should be talking about fundamentally wrong. The Build Back Better Act. Hold on. While Tesla's an American automaker, it utilizes non-union labor, and under the proposed terms would also not qualify for the additional $4,500 incentive. That being said, its unit limit would be dissolved, and it could claim at least some incentives once again. The Build Back Better Act and its potential $12,500 EV credit still awaits passage following the CBO score and the official congressional approval. A lot can change between now and the official signature in the Oval Office. Yeah, like it not ever happening. But here are the latest terms introduced earlier this week. Note, these exact terms are not confirmed until the bill is officially passed. Federal tax credit for EVs jumps from $7,500 to $12,500. Keep the $7,500 incentive for new electric cars for 5 years. Add an additional $4,500 for EVs assembled in the U.S. using union labor. I like that. Another $500 for EVs using battery packs with 50% of components, including cells, made in the U.S. Zero-emission vans, SUVs, and trucks with MSRPs up to $80K qualify. Increase from previous policy. Hey, that means you can get your Rivian truck and have your tax credit with it. Electric sedans priced up to $55,000 MSRP stays the same. The full EV tax credit will be available to individuals reporting a joint adjusted gross incomes of Jesus, me and these numbers, dyslexic. $250,000 or less, $550,000 for joint filers, decreased from $400,000 for individuals at $800,000 for joint filers. I don't get the decrease. I mean, I guess, they just don't want to hand out tax rebates to more people, but you should hand out tax rebates to more people if it means supercharging getting gas-burning vehicles off the road. I would have kept those numbers the same. EVs must be made in the U.S. starting in... What? EVs must be made in the U.S. starting in 2027 to qualify for any of the... Wait, so we still gotta wait for fucking... We gotta wait for fucking 6 years? Or, well, I mean, it's the end of this year, so... We gotta wait for 5 years? Why do we have to wait for 5 years? Wait, I want to know more about what this is all about. Why do we have to wait for 5 years in order to take advantage of that tax credit? People aren't even going to remember this shit 5 years from now. God knows what's going to happen 5 years from now. Eliminates tax credit cap after automakers hit 200,000 EVs sold, making GM and Tesla once again eligible. That's good too. I don't know what this is all about. That should be lowered to 2023. Yeah, if you pass this shit, if they do manage to somehow pass this in the next month or so, then this year needs to be lowered down to 2023. That's stupid. That's just ridiculous. 2027. Yeah, I don't think that bill's gonna pass anyways. This guy sucks. What a weak president. What a completely weak president. Okay, speaking of Rivian, toxic bro culture. Former Rivian executive speaks out, sues company. This is coming at a time when Rivian, I believe, is trying to pump up their IPO. Let's see what this is all about. On Thursday afternoon, former Rivian Vice President of Sales and Marketing Laura Schwab published a blistering account of her experience at the electric vehicle maker Rivian. Well, did she publish it to Medium or something? Oh, come on. Stop it. Oh my god. Oh my god. Yep. Life outside the boys club. Why I spoke up about Rivian's toxic bro culture and got fired. Well, let's hear from her herself. Women are not given the linear path to success that many men take for granted. Okay. Coming out swinging. I feel like I read that sentence and I just in the back of my head I heard Bill Burr's disgust. I mean, it's a true statement. My 20-year journey in the automotive industry began with an entry-level role at Jaguar Land Rover. I try to say Jaguar the proper way, not Jaguar the way that Americans say it, Jaguar. At Jaguar Land Rover, and led to becoming the first female president in Aston Martin's 108-year history. To achieve that success, I took jobs nobody else wanted and worked tirelessly for every opportunity. My love for Aston Martin, okay. Then she worked for Rivian. Rivian publicly boasts about its culture, so it was a crushing blow when I joined the company and almost immediately experienced a toxic bro culture that marginalizes women and contributes to the company's making mistakes. I raised concerns to HR about the gender discrimination from my manager, the boys club culture, and the impact it was having on me, my team, and the company. 2 days later, my boss fired me. This is the lesson I always tell people. Never go to HR. HR is not there to help you. HR is there to help the company. HR does not care about you. They do not protect you. They are there only to protect the interest of the company. So going to HR about shit like this, you're asking to be fired. You are asking for more problems than solutions. So don't ever go to HR about shit like this. Find some other way. Like go to the media before you go to HR. You know. If you have that opportunity available to you, if that actually is something that I know in the video game industry, there were outlets you can go to. And I would tell people that. I've had women coworkers who would talk to me about dudes being shitty. And they'd be asking like, "Should I go to HR?" And I'd be like, "No, go to HR." HR's just giving the enemy heads up, basically. Only thing HR is gonna do is the second you walk out of their office, they're gonna contact the company's lawyers. And the lawyers are gonna give HR advice on what to do to neutralize the situation, which more often than not is going to be find a way to fire you. Find, a day that you came in late, or find something that, wasn't in keeping with the company handbook or whatever. They'll find some way to get rid of you as a nuisance. And then find some way to CYA. Rivian recruited me to create a sales and marketing arm as they prepared to sell their first vehicles. Prior to my arrival, there was no organization in place to ensure a successful launch of the promised 1,000 vehicles. This was a challenge that I was excited to join a company that was building a brand and its planet-minded vehicles from the ground up, and that led every conversation with the importance of company culture. That's your first sign right there. First red flag. I've worked at a lot of places, and usually the places that pump up company culture are the ones that are like the most dubiously run. Only in a few instances was that not the case. Like, if you've got a good company culture, you don't gotta talk about it all the time. It's just obvious. It's present, and it emanates in people's excitement in the company's driving vision. People want to work towards that company's end. Excuse me. That shows up in the culture. Like, it's understandable. Like, once you get hired somewhere, like, or once you're trying to get hired somewhere, like, they'll bring up company culture in like an interview and stuff. But usually they just show you that. One of the companies I worked at before, they didn't really talk that much about company culture to me during the interview process, but when I went to do an in-person interview there, like, I saw the culture firsthand. I saw how it was, and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is real chill. I like this. I joined, and for the most part, it was cool. I mean, there were some troubles. There were some difficulties here and there, but for the most part, it was really cool. It had a nice culture. I liked it. But, they didn't have to, like, beat it into me with the hammer of Thor that they had a great company culture or that company culture was important. This emphasis on culture resonated deeply with me, as I believe that the greatest brands and companies will survive and thrive not just by the products they make, but by the culture they create to find and keep great talent. The culture at Rivian was carefully cultivated, but not in the manner it was advertised. Rivian in many ways resembled other automotive companies, dominated by men at the top. However, the most striking difference between Rivian and other companies where I had worked was a lack of automotive experience among the other executives. The company's founder, RJ Scaringe, was clearly and literally in the driver's seat, and he surrounded himself with a tight-knit group of men who constantly had his ear. Many of these men had worked together before or hired one another and had created their own boys' club. The bro culture affected how the most important decisions were being made at the company. Despite my 20 years of auto experience and my positions as VP of Sales and Marketing, I was excluded from crucial meetings that impacted our mission and my team. Time and time again, I raised concerns regarding vehicle pricing and manufacturing deadlines, but no one listened, even though I have extensive experience launching and pricing vehicles. It wasn't until my often less experienced male colleagues raised the exact same ideas that the chief growth officer, internally called chief commercial officer, would respond. Never in my years in the auto industry had I experienced such blatant marginalization. Exclusion became a pattern, and I was left out of countless meetings where business needs and my role dictate that I should have been present. I thought that my years of experience and my deep knowledge and expertise had earned me a spot at the table, but at Rivian it did not. While my male colleagues sat in the meeting room without me, I could not even schedule one-on-one meetings with my boss, the chief growth officer. He told me he would only communicate with me by instant messenger, and that would be outside office hours late in the evening. What? Hold it! Alright, that took a while to find. Very low return on that investment of time, but whatever. Anyways, I decided the most appropriate approach would be to talk with my HR business partner. Objection! Yes, as I mentioned before, don't go to HR. That's a bad move. I explained to her the instances of exclusion and marginalization I had been experiencing, specifically by our chief growth officer, and my overall concern that there was a bro culture at Rivian that was impacting women. She told me that the chief growth officer had not been speaking to her either, and that she heard what I was saying. It was relief to be heard, to finally be heard, and I was optimistic that would happen, that change would happen. Just 2 days later, my boss, the chief growth officer, Just 2 days later, my boss, the chief growth officer, who had not had a one-on-one meeting with me in months, just 2 days later, my boss, the chief growth officer, who had not had a one-on-one meeting with me in months, called me into the office for a meeting. As I entered the room, he was sitting there with the same HR business partner to whom I had reported the gender discrimination I was experiencing. My boss told me that I was fired. He assured me that I was a well-respected high performer. The reason he gave for the termination, this was part of a larger reorganization. But I was the only person reorganized. My response, bullshit. I pointed out that there was no coincidence in my firing and my raising concerns of bro culture and gender discrimination just 2 days earlier. The very person I had flagged as promoting the discriminatory culture was the person who terminated me. It is simply not credible that the company would eliminate the executive responsible for sales and marketing just as Rivian was beginning to sell vehicles and was on the eve of an IPO. And a vastly growing company that was hiring over 200 new employees a week does not eliminate high performers without some ulterior motive. I had witnessed less qualified male colleagues being shifted around in an effort to keep them at Rivian. Sadly, my story is not unique. This happens to women all the time. Countless women do not voice their concerns in the workplace because they fear such retribution. Rivian has a toxic culture and a pattern of marginalizing women, but they are not the only ones. I have spent many years speaking to women about achieving their dreams, not letting industries that are traditionally male-dominated deter them from going after what they want, and to bring more women with them along the way. That is why Rivian's retaliation against me is so heartbreaking. In addition to harming my family and me, it has the potential to deter other women from pursuing opportunities or from speaking out about discrimination. No woman should be afraid to question the culture they are witnessing at work. That is why it is so important to come forward publicly and hold Rivian accountable. From Laura Schwab's words, from Laura Schwab's mouth to our ears. On Thursday afternoon, former Rivian Vice President of Sales and Marketing Laura Schwab published a blistering account of her experience at electric vehicle maker Rivian. Schwab moved to the startup in November 2020 after a lengthy career at Jaguar Land Rover and Aston Martin. Almost immediately, she began experiencing a, quote, toxic bro culture that marginalizes women, attributes to the company making mistakes, she says. Rivian has painted an image of itself as a blend of automaker and tech startup. Well, there's your bro culture, toxic bro culture right there. But Schwab says that the actual culture at the company was was that of a boys' club surrounding the founder, CEO RJ Scaringe. She writes that she was sidelined and excluded from decision making, despite being hired specifically because of her experience in the automotive, whatever. So. Schwab's former boss at Aston Martin, Dr. Andy Palmer, defended her, saying that she is, quote, one of the most professional sales and marketing execs I've had the pleasure to work with. I have no idea why you'd hire someone of this quality and then not listen to them. Rivian declined to comment on the matter, citing the quiet period of its upcoming IPO, where it hopes to raise $8.4 billion. Yeah. Electric vehicle maker Rivian seeks to raise $8.4 billion in IPO. Whew, that's a pretty pity. That's a pretty pity. But I think this is also why I've noticed that I own one share of Ford, and I noticed that one measly little share started skyrocketing in value lately, and I'm guessing it has something to do with this little number right here. The company, which is backed by Amazon, said in the filing that it plans to offer 135 million shares at a price between 57 to 62. Underwriters also have an option to buy 20.25 million additional shares. If underwriters exercise that option, Rivian would raise as much as 9.6 billion. Rivian filed October 1st to become a publicly traded company in the United States. The S-1 document did not disclose the targeted share price at the time. The amendment document filed Monday provided the new information, which included interest from repeat backer Amazon and newcomer Blackstone. Blackstone. Amazon funds and accounts advised by Tiro. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, I have a feeling that the timing on this, I think, isn't coincidental. I think she's definitely trying to impact that IPO. But I mean, it's weird, so it seems like her gripes when I hear about, maybe this speaks very poorly about the game industry. Whenever I see things about toxic bro culture, I immediately go to like, you know, harassment and assault and shit like that, like the crazy shit, the Activision shit, the Riot shit, the Ubisoft shit. You know, like that's where I go to when I see that. And there weren't any of those accusations in here. I was expecting it, but there wasn't. Like all of her complaints is like basically she wasn't being listened to. She wasn't being invited to the meetings. Uh, you know, and that's, I mean, that's not to say those aren't legitimate complaints. It seems like they weren't, if the claims are accurate, that it seems like they weren't really, I mean, I don't know why they would hire her for that role and then turn around and not listen to her. I mean, it's not like she was in an entry level position. Like she was a part of the C-suite, so why bring her in then? Like there's more to it obviously than just her side of this. And given that there aren't any accusations of like, you know, impropriety, like there's no assault claims or anything like that, I am willing to give the other side of this angle maybe a little bit more leeway to like, you know, explain why they, I mean clearly they fired her, so they obviously thought that she wasn't a worthwhile contributor to their plans, hence leaving her out of meetings and shit. And then once she complained about being left out of meetings, they were like, all right, well, we'll leave you out of all meetings henceforth by sending you your walking papers. It could be just as simple as something as like they hired her, they thought she was going to bring something of her expertise to the table, and maybe she did, and maybe they just decided, yeah, you know what, this is kind of like an old school way of doing things. Like her ideas of running, how we should run this company is similar to how car companies were run, you know, 40, 50 years ago, and maybe we want to do something different. We're disruptors. We're trying to disrupt the industry. You know, maybe it was something as simple as that. Maybe it just wasn't a good fit, and they handled it very poorly. You know, it's not to say that they weren't guided in their decision making by a toxic bro culture. I absolutely believe that. But given the nature of the claims here, I don't think it's like, you know, I don't necessarily think that whatever she experienced there was worth a scathing Medium post that, you know, is targeting them on the eve of their IPO announcement. But that's just me. I could be wrong. There could be plenty of women that are like, oh, absolutely, this is worthwhile. This is worthy of that. I mean, there are plenty of dudes who have also been fired for being bad fits. You know, I don't know. I just feel like I need to hear more about what's going on here before coming to any sort of judgment on it. Company slated to buy Lordstown Motors plant unveils 3 new electric vehicle prototypes. Well, we have a new entry in the EV space here. Foxconn, who you might remember as the Chinese manufacturers of the iPhones, for which their poor employees fling themselves out of the windows to meet a grisly death in hopes that grisly death helps them escape the even more tormented work environments that Foxconn subjects them to the point where Foxconn actually had to put nets outside of those windows so that if their employees tried to unalive themselves, they would just get caught in a net and then forced back to the assembly lines. That Foxconn. I guess they're gonna buy that Lordstown factory and start building their own EVs out of there. The company that has an agreement to buy Lordstown Motors plants unveiled 3 new electric vehicle prototypes Monday. Foxconn showed off an electric bus, car, and SUV. The company also builds iPhones for Apples. They're working to get into the electric vehicle market. Their Model C SUV will hit the market in Taiwan in 2023, according to the company. Their bus is slated to hit the streets in test cities next year. Lordstown Motors announced last month that Foxconn would buy the former GM plant and manufacture the Endurance electric pickup truck for Lordstown Motor. Foxconn is also supposed to make cars for Fisker, another electric company. Yeah, that's who we talked about before. We were talking about Lordstown. They were going to lease out, I guess, their building. And I guess that's what they landed on. They're going to I mean, well, this isn't a lease. It looks like they're going to buy it outright. Was that Lordstown that was going to lease out that building? I think it was. But yeah, so I guess Foxconn's getting into the EV game. I wonder if there are any better pictures of this thing. Indonesia and Foxconn, it talks to take over electric vehicle investment. Taiwan's Foxconn has big ambitions in electric vehicles and has 3 prototypes, including the Model C shown here. They gotta come up with some better names than these same old model letter prototypes. I mean, just judging... Oh, here we go. Here's some better pictures. It looks all right. It kind of this one kind of looks like an old Saturn. Remember those cars, like the Saturn Ion or Saturn whatever else those things were called. This is kind of giving me Saturn vibes. I don't know if that's good or not. I can't even remember who manufactured those things. Saturn Corporation. They went defunct in 2010. Parent was Motors Liquidation GM, so Saturn was GM. That makes sense. That's why they... God, what terrible looking cars. I don't even know if they're reliable or not. I don't think I've ever actually been in a Saturn. Those were the only pictures? Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you liked what I said, what Justin said, if you like the content we're providing, if you had any kind of laughs at all, even if you hate us, if you hate my guts, if you want to stab me, if you want to say all sorts of horrible things to me, cool. Like the video, subscribe. You'll get fed all sorts of shit you'll probably hate. And if you like us, you'll get fed all sorts of shit you probably like. So please and thank you.